Coronavirus vaccine numbers, the optimism isn't yet enough to lure workers back into their office buildings. On average, 24% of workforces are back at their desks in the 10 largest U.S. cities. That means, of course, 75% are not there. Joining me now, Capitalist Pig hedge fund manager and Fox News contributor Jonathan Hoenig, and Walser Wealth Management CEO Rebecca Walser. Rebecca, let me talk to you first. Do you think that office buildings will ever fill up again?
You know, David, not under these conditions, right? I mean, if you're going to stay remote long enough, and this has been long enough now, you adapt and you think, well, you know, we can only live temporarily for so long before we adapt to something that is tolerable for the long term. And that's what's happening with corporations around the country, and certainly with workers. They've adapted to make it efficient enough to remain at home, and that's going to make it really hard to pull everybody back into the commute and all the additional expense. Well,
Jonathan, you know that capitalism abhors a vacuum if it's free to operate. And of course, there's a lot of restrictions on capitalism at the moment. But what happens with all that space, with 75% occupancy in buildings like the one I'm in Midtown Manhattan, and the ones people are in Los Angeles, the few people that are there? What happens to all that space?
David, you will see a dramatic retooling of a lot of commercial office space, not unlike the dramatic retooling that's happened, for example, in shopping malls over the years. As Amazon, a lot of those shopping malls have become medical facilities. They've become gymnasiums, and you will see exactly that same type of promise and process happen in big commercial office spaces as this tech adoption, which, you know, was in place even before the pandemic. The pandemic really kicked it into high gear. But what we'll find over and over again is that in-person meeting will become the exception. It's Zoom, it's Skype that will become the norm. And David, the fact that not only Microsoft, but Salesforce, which has all these trophy towers in San Francisco and other major cities, they're now telling their sales force, if you will, their workforce, that they can work at home. There's a more flexible schedule. So this is a change that's here to stay, even post-pandemic.
Well, Rebecca, what happens to the cities? Cities like New York, like Chicago, like Los Angeles, which even if they're retooled, as Jonathan said, there's still going to be a lot fewer businesses in these places than there used to be, which means a lot less revenue for cities. Now, I think in New York and Chicago and L.A., they've been misallocating a lot of those resources. But the fact is that they're going to go broke. We're going to see some real bankruptcies in these cities, are we not?
No, you are 100% right, David. I mean, this is my biggest worry from a tax revenue perspective, that these cities have had such a monopoly because the businesses have been there and they've had to have their employees come in, whether it's a 2-hour train ride from Jersey into the city. They're coming in because they have to, right? And now that they don't have to, they're not going to. And the businesses are going to obviously lose tenants, and that is a huge tax loss for these blue states that have high tax revenue, these blue cities that have, you know, the city itself has a tax. This is a big, huge problem. And this is why you have, you know, governors looking to the president to help bail them out from 2020. And
well,
it can't
Jonathan,
go on forever.
You can't, and you can't have bailouts forever. I think that was the last point you were making, Rebecca. Could this force these free spending liberals out of office in blue cities like New York, L.A., and Chicago?
Well, blue cities, but David, what about, you know, blue national governments? I mean, look, the response to COVID has not been like the 1918 pandemic. It's been to spend massive amounts of money on a local level and also on a national level. You know, the debt to GDP now is going to be larger than the government's, to be 102%. So that's the real legacy, unfortunate, of COVID-19 will be this massive debt on a local level, as you said, in states and municipalities and cities, but on a federal level, on a national level as well. And that will stick with us for years and years to come, decades to come.
Well, and what is it that Maggie Thatcher said? Eventually you run out of other people's money. That's the problem with socialist solutions. Rebecca and Jonathan, we're going to see more of you a little later in the show. Thank you very much. Coming up.